Come and participate on the National Day of Action to End Violence and Genocide on Transgender People, October 1st, 2022, across the United States. Get in touch with your local orgs to find out the when and where of your area. We've got a fun story out of Idaho today. Well, less fun and more modern-day horror. The Idaho House has passed a bill that would effectively not only ban, but criminalize the teaching of the Judaic faith. Parents are no longer allowed to teach their children their Judaic heritage, and priests are no longer allowed to perform Judaic rites, under pain of life in prison. The governor of Idaho has already promised to quash this bill if it gets to her desk, and the Senate in Idaho has made similar claims, but... this is still really worrying, right? It's really weird. It's really weird that any legal body in the United States would even presume to have the power to ban any kind of faith, let alone that they follow through with it. And it's really weird. It's really weird that they framed these actions under the pretext of protecting children from Jewish subversion. And it sure sounds like, and I don't mean to punch below the belt here, but it sure sounds like the GOP in Idaho is doing some Nazi shit, right? Like the GOP is out doing Nazi shit on purpose, out in broad daylight where everyone can fucking see them. Someone should fucking do something about this. I mean, if the GOP is out doing Nazi shit in broad fucking daylight, people of good conscience can agree someone should fucking do something about that, right?
6 months ago. You wrote this 6 months ago. You had the whole fucking script banged out in February. Then you had some people look over it for a month. You had the citations and everything, man. And at this point, this is not just old news. This is the great-grandparents of old news.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm doing it now.
Okay, I get that. But then you were doing those shorts for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I know. I was just trying to get back into the swing of making videos, and I stopped doing that. Listen, this video was at the top of my list, and that's why I'm doing it now.
If this was the first thing on your list, why did you make that shitty video about Destiny first?
Fuck you, Snuggles.
And fuck you. Why didn't I get any lines in the Destiny video?
Friends, enemies, assorted potted plants. I'm going to need to put up all of the trigger warnings. Literally all of them. We are going to be discussing genocide. We are going to be staring it right in the face. And as a consequence, we are going to be discussing every kind of violence conceivable by man done to every kind of people. I have attempted to soften these potential blows as much as I can, but when discussing these things, at least in an ethical manner, there is no way to avoid this conversation. So, if there is any topic that triggers an extreme emotional reaction in you, this may not be something that you're able to watch. And for that, I apologize. Having said that, I feel I need to clarify, first off, that the situation in Idaho was not as I have described it. I'm not going to say that it was better or worse, because this topic eludes simple classification like that. On the surface, it was perhaps not as bad, but the more you inform yourself about the topic, the worse it becomes. To the point that, as someone who has taken a great effort to inform himself, I would argue that what almost happened in Idaho is worse than if they had banned the Judaic faith. To inform those of you who weren't made aware at the time, the Idaho House had attempted to pass a bill that would have made trans-affirming healthcare punishable under pain of life in prison. This included healthcare provided both in and out of state. The bill was immediately quashed in the Senate, but I'm not sure that matters in any meaningful respect. There is a vital thing that needs to be grasped here, and it is that these laws are not intended to be legal. They are not intended to hold up in court. They are meant to act as a basis for the elimination of an unwanted minority. And I know that I've provided several warnings already, but I feel compelled to warn again. This is where the talk about the genocide begins. This is where things get really dark. If you can't handle that, please get off the ride. I'm not going to be upset. Your mental health is not as important as watching a silly video on YouTube. Everyone strapped in tight? Good. Genocide is a necessarily complicated topic. It is broadly misunderstood. Genocide refers not to one singular action, but a series of complex processes that ends with the physical removal of one group of undesirable people from a specific space. There are many ways to achieve that physical removal depending on the kind of people you are talking about. You could simply pick up one people and move them, as the United States did to the native tribes of this land. Further complicating discussions of genocide is how these processes initially came to be defined, and how they have been evoked in the past. I am not here to talk about any of that. Explaining what the Republican Party is doing to trans people is going to require us to just take the UN definition of genocide at face value. I don't know if I should be sorry, but I am not. The most vital thing to understand throughout all of this is that genocide is not a singular event. It is a process with a series of well-defined and well-understood steps. I'm going to be pulling the definitions I use from the Genocide Watch website, but I will leave other resources in the description for interested parties, including the UN definition of genocide from their website, and the Wikipedia page for the 10 stages of genocide. If you're interested in doing more studying on your own, I would suggest you start there. Step 1 of any genocide is classification, where the vague idea of a amorphous them is first created. This initial classification can be based on any number of things: ethnicity, nationality, religion, specific biological features, or more commonly a combination of two or more of these things. Think Jewish people and noses, or Irish people eating potatoes, or Muslim people being Arabic. Step 2 is symbolization, where specific unspoken classifications are given names and, more commonly, specific negative associations. A vital thing to understand about this step is that it is not simple human compartmentalization. This is the presumption that a previously classified group necessarily possesses negative qualities. It is the presumption that Jewish people are greedy, that immigrants are lazy, that Arabic people are Muslim terrorists, and that autistic people are liars. Step 3 is discrimination. Here, the classified people and the symbols associated with them are recognized officially and unofficially. Here, those classified people are denied rights and privileges that other people have. And it needs to be understood that this discrimination needs not be more complex than "we do not serve Chinese people at this hairdressing establishment." Alternatively, it may be as complex as people coming together to form political organizations that they may better deny these classified people specific rights. Genocide Watch uses, as examples, denying people the right to vote and denying people the right to citizenship. Put a pin in that. Genocide Watch also helpfully notes that removing power from the classified people centralizes power against them. If this group of people has no power, and this group of people acting against them has more power, then the people who are acting against them have more power. Step 4 is dehumanization. Here, violent action is encouraged against the classified group. They are likened to both vermin and insects, and made out to be both incredibly dangerous and worthy of persecution. The most common standby, the one that almost every classified group in history has had to deal with, is the accusation that they are violent rapists. A similar claim, although this claim is not so common now, has to do with homosexuals, and the accusation that they cannot reproduce, so they have to recruit. Something I feel the need to stress is that this isn't just removing the classified group's humanity, and it isn't just encouraging violence against them. It is the normalization of those things. This is when violence against a classified group becomes normal and expected. We look with shock and horror today at Nazi propaganda posters depicting violence against various people, but to the average person living in Nazi Germany, these things faded into background noise. Think of this as the switch from "a politician dehumanized a colleague" to "this politician is inhuman." Step 5 is organization. Here, various groups dedicated to the persecution of the classified group have finished their brainstorming and began drafting up plans to finalize the physical removal of the classified group. If these groups are planning to use violence, this is a step where they find people willing to do that violence. If these groups are planning to propose legislation, this is a step where they find people willing to propose that legislation, or find people amongst them who are capable of holding office. Step 6 is polarization. Here, the act of persecuting the classified group has not just become normalized, but the act of not persecuting them becomes, if not discouraged, then politically inconvenient. Persecuting the classified group becomes a statement, either of moral intent or political action. Think of Margaret Thatcher saying,
"Children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay."
Or Hillary Clinton saying,
"We need to take these people on. They are often connected to big drug cartels. They are not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy."
Here, the violent persecution of the classified group has become so normalized, so expected, that not persecuting that classified group is considered antisocial in some circles. Imagine, if you would, imagine that the violent persecution of a minority group, let's say LGBTQ people, for example, is so normalized, so expected, that not immediately and emphatically denying that you are a member of that group is grounds for violent and immediate retribution. Imagine that, if you can. Step 7 is preparation. I want to make a special note here that Genocide Watch website states that one of the euphemisms for genocidal violence is counterterrorism. Good to hear someone acknowledge that. Here, those groups that have been specifically working towards the persecution of the classified group have finally gained enough political power to act on the genocide that they have been planning in previous steps. Here, legislation is passed, lines are drawn, and people finally say out loud what their intentions are. There's a video by a channel called Innuendo Studios called The Death of a Euphemism. It's part of a series of videos about the alt-right and how they operate in a political context. That video, and what it describes, is part of this step. I want to note here as well, Genocide Watch claims there is a sudden increase in inflammatory rhetoric and hate propaganda with the objective of creating fear in the other group. Put a pin in that too. Step 8 is persecution. Here, the classified group is singled out legally and separated from the rest of the population. This is where those laws that have been getting passed start getting utilized. The classified group are stripped of their belongings and denied basic resources like food and shelter. Here is where those weapons and soldiers start getting used. Here is where people start being corralled into ghettos and concentration camps. To quote Genocide Watch again, members of the victim group may be forced to wear identifying symbols. Step 9 is extermination, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Mass murder. Sometimes things worse than murder. Nothing else needs to be said. And step 10, the final step, is denial. Denial in this context can take many forms depending on how far the genocide went. It can range from denying that a classified group were ever classified in the first place to denying that a classified group ever existed at all. Think of the language the conservatives use to describe the native people of these United States to this day, if you want an example of the most extreme version of denial. This denial serves a purpose. It absolves the people responsible for the genocide the responsibility for their actions. If they already did the genocide, then the last thing to be done is to get away with it. And if you're expecting me to explain where the GOP stand in their genocide against trans people, step 7. Preparation. I will go through all of them again to explain. Step 1 is just trans people in a negative context. Step 1 is the idea that trans people are so different and unique that they require unique and different laws to govern their behaviors. Step 2 is the creation of stereotypes. This is where differences between trans people and cisgender people are identified in order to justify, big air quotes there, future actions. Think about people who have said that trans people look fake, or look like fake versions of their gender. Think about people who have said that trans people are sexual degenerates. Think about man hands. Step 3 is where you start seeing people noticing the, big air quotes again here, differences between trans people and start discriminating against them. Step 3 is where you start seeing businesses refusing to let trans people use their preferred bathrooms. Step 3 is where the trans panic defense becomes a thing. Here is where cities start passing ordinances banning drag shows. There's a pin from earlier that I want to pull now. Genocide Watch mentioned, as I stated earlier, that one of the most common ways of persecuting a classified group is to deny them the right to vote and to deny them citizenship. With trans people, that is very easy to do. A transphobic person in the right place can prevent a trans person from voting just by saying that their ID doesn't look right. A transphobic police officer can arrest a trans person on the same basis, or on the basis that their presented gender does not match the gender on their ID. These do not need to be, and were not initially, organized efforts. Individual bigots in places of power can make anyone's life a living hell. This was also the stage where individual transphobes got together and started either forming their own organizations or inserting themselves into extant organizations. In the UK, groups like the LGB Alliance had to be created from whole cloth, but here in the US, let's not pretend that the Alliance Defending Freedom, for example, wasn't already amenable to transphobic rhetoric. Step 4 is where you see widespread dissemination of hate speech. Images of burly and bald men in poor-fitting dresses all over the television, all over film. Rumors that trans people are assaulting women and children in bathrooms and in schools. Step 4 is where Glinner thinks it's hilarious for a woman to be violently assaulted for having a penis. Step 4 is where a legal framework emerges claiming that the sexuality of trans people is worthy of violent retaliation. Step 5 is things that happened mostly behind the scenes. Interested parties look at what arguments changed people's minds most effectively, and where people's minds were changed the most. 6 months ago, I couldn't have told you anything about this, but now I have listened in on several hate group summits and disrupted several hate group events. Now I can tell you with a great deal of certainty that groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom and the Illinois Family Association are working together to find a legal framework to remove trans people from schools, and to find a moral justification after the fact. The framework that they've come up with, and I need to stress this is not a joke, this is not something I'm making up, and this is something that these groups have said behind closed doors. The justification, the framework that they have come up with, is that the United Nations is using Agenda 21 to turn all of the kids gay and trans, and that the only way that God-fearing parents can stop that from happening is by pulling their children out of school and beating the queer out of them. While there were less than 50 people at these conferences I attended, the quality of the attendees vastly outweighs their quantity. Amongst the people attending these conferences were the Republican nominee for governor of Illinois, a man named Darren Bailey, and his prospective lieutenant governor, Stephanie Trussell. Stephanie Trussell is, by the by, on the board of the Illinois Family Institute. And that is vital to know, because that indicates that these hate groups plan on enacting these laws regardless of whether or not people want them enacted. And that follows a pattern throughout these United States and throughout history, where laws like this are forced upon people who are not receptive to them. Step 6 is, complicated. Or at least there's a very complicated aspect to it. There are the simple things, the things that I'm sure you understand. Claims like biological essentialism is a thing, or won't somebody please think of the children? But I made a video a couple of weeks ago talking about how there are very strange videos online, and how those videos are not meant to be rational arguments, but statement of intent and proselytization. I did argue in that video, and would argue here, that that kind of weird argumentation, that kind of proselytization, is fishing for marks. It is how the transphobic people find people willing to do the violence that they require to be done. And I think it is a mistake not to understand that. When Paul Joseph Watson talks about soy boys being degenerates, he's not saying that apropos of nothing. He wants something to be done about the boys. And as I said before, step 7 is where we are now. Legislation is in the process of being proposed and passed. Hate groups are actively recruiting. Violence against trans people is being encouraged and in some cases done. And here we need to pull another pin, the one about violent rhetoric and inflammatory propaganda. We need to understand that the purpose of this legislation isn't just to control trans people, but to instill fear in them. Here we need to pull another pin from before, the one about the sudden increase in violent hate speech and propaganda. People of good conscience and moral clarity need to understand that the purpose of bills like the one in Idaho is not even to do the thing that it proposes to be done. It is not just throwing something at the wall and seeing if it sticks. The purpose is to incite violence against trans people and to make them live in fear of that violence. And in the case of the bill in Idaho, the purpose is even more clear. It is not just intended to create fear in trans people, but in trans allies as well. The Idaho Senate and the governor of Idaho did say that they would immediately veto the bill if it came to them. And to the credit of both of those institutions, the Senate did immediately veto that bill. And that is the best case scenario for those things. But we are not seeing the best case scenario in all places. We have seen similar legislation proposed in Florida, Texas, Alabama, Kentucky, Wisconsin, Arizona, Missouri, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Utah. That's 1 of every 5 states. That's bills affecting just over 93 million people. And those are just the most overtly hostile bills. Bills proposing, for example, the banning of trans athletes from participating in school events have been proposed in 48 states. That's all but 2.
You've had 6 months to ruminate on it now, right? How do we fix this? This is Nazi shit, right? We're staring in the face of Nazi shit, so how do we stop Nazi shit?
What do you mean, what do we do about it? We beat them the same way we beat the fascists the first time. Go read a book.
Okay, so I kind of got that, but Ron, not everyone is 5 feet and 500 pounds of pure impotent rage and rolling blubber.
I am a very tiny man, thank you for pointing that out.
So let's say some people think Luigiing the problem is counterproductive. What do?
Yeah, you don't have to tell me again. Genocide Watch advises that the prevention of preparation, that's the stage that we're at right now, may include arms embargoes and commissions to enforce them. It should include prosecution of incitement and conspiracy to commit genocide, both crimes under Article 3 of the Genocide Convention. That's not helpful. That's not helpful for a lot of reasons, but chief amongst them is the old leftist standby. Any attempt to seize the arms of working-class people must be frustrated, by force if necessary. And you know who said that? Grigory Rasputin. That means it must be true. I'm going to level with you. I was not optimistic about the possibility of someone on the far right even being charged with a crime, let alone the crime of incitement. But the way that things are going now, I feel reasonably confident that if brass came down to tacks, the feds would be on the side of the trans people. But we still don't want things to get to that point. No one wants things to get so wildly out of control anywhere that the kinds of people who are saying no cops at Pride are getting out their phones and calling the feds for help. Which means that for all the useful information that Genocide Watch has for us, they don't have any useful advice in this regard. We are flying by the seat of our pants. And listen, I can't tell you for sure what will and will not work, what will and will not convince people. I'm not a soothsayer. I'm not a prophet. I have never claimed to be these things. I have always maintained that I am an unemployed loser from cornfield land with the IQ of a gorilla. But I have 15 years worth of experience doing political activism, and this is something that I think it would be worthwhile to put that into. So, the first thing to do is to let people know what is happening. Start using the word genocide. I don't care if it's cringe. If you're not making people uncomfortable, then you are not having these conversations correctly. No one likes hearing about oppression. No one likes hearing about people being hurt. But if you don't know that these things are happening, you cannot stop them from happening. Step 1 of getting people to care is getting them to know. The second thing to do is to let people know that they are already invested in this problem. Let people know that the victims of the trans genocide are going to be people that they know and love and care about. And more than that, let them know that the victims of the trans genocide will not just be trans people. Entwined with these anti-trans bills are anti-gay bills. And entwined with non-legislative actions like book bannings are actions intended to harm people of color. I don't think it's out of line to say that the reversal of the Roe v. Wade decision was motivated, at least in part, by a desire to harm trans people. These are not separate problems. So you can demonstrate that this is not just going to be a problem for trans people, it's going to be a problem for a lot of different people. Step 2 of getting people to care is showing them why they should care. The third thing to do is to aggressively confront the people responsible for the genocide. This is vital for 2 reasons. First, you're showing people who needs to be confronted and how to confront them. A lot of people can see that there's a problem, but don't even know where to begin starting to fix it. This shows them where to go and what to do. Second, you are giving people permission to go and confront these people. A common refrain that I hear is that people are too apathetic towards a struggle of everything and everyone to do something that doesn't benefit them. My experience is that this is not true. My experience is that ordinary people are very concerned about these issues because ordinary people understand that these issues affect people that they care about, and also sometimes them. The problem is that these concerned people do not know how to confront the people who are doing the bad things. And I don't just mean people who consider Luigiing the problem to be excessive. The media portrays any sort of political action to not just be an act of violence, but an act of violent reprisal. And you saw this clear as day during the George Floyd protests in 2020. Violent, rioting police officers were shooting civilians, journalists, and even elected officials in the face. And those same mainstream journalists were preaching about how BLM was the real problem, and they needed to calm down. The violent protesters, who were not currently engaged in acts of violence, and who were being violently subjugated by the police, just needed to calm down, the media told us. I remember, I was there. And make no mistake, the purpose of that kind of reporting is to confuse and confound, but it's going to take a long time to explain, and I don't have a lot of time right now. Just add it to the list.
Add it to the list.
But the broader point that I'm wanting to make is that even though BLM were continuously vilified throughout all of 2020, people still came out in staggering numbers to support them. They still came out and supported the protests because they wanted to help. If you give people something that seems like a solution, if you tell them that something can solve their problems, then people will do that thing. Step 3 of getting people to care is showing them what to do. The fourth thing to do is start organizing. Find people who are sympathetic to you and what you believe, and get together with them to plan larger demonstrations. And not just demonstrations either. There are organizations like GLAAD, like the Trans Defense Fund, that have been countering far-right propaganda about trans people since the 80s. Minor sidebar, I did not know about GLAAD or the Trans Defense Fund until one of the trans people I knew, who I had look at this script for me about 6 months ago, told me about them. This is why you have people who you are trying to talk about look over the things that you write. Otherwise, you're just speaking over them. Find institutions or individuals who either have power or are seeking power and see if they are sympathetic to the trans cause. By way of an example, I'm fairly certain that the Democratic Socialists of America are very sympathetic to the trans cause. And I don't just say that because I am a card-carrying member of the DSA. I say that because they've had it on their charter since 2017, at the very least, that they are sympathetic to the trans cause and support trans causes. Seek out institutions or individuals who are either looking for power or have power and see if they are sympathetic to the trans cause. By way of an example, the DSA, I am fairly certain, are sympathetic to the trans cause. And I don't just say that because I am a card-carrying member of the Democratic Socialists of America. I say that because it has been in their charter since 2017, that they are sympathetic to the trans cause in an entire list of ways.
Hello, my name is Kendra Wade, and I am a local organizer for the Springfield DSA. I had organized with and been dissatisfied with other organizations before landing with the DSA, and they've been great, specifically in regards to trans rights. It's been the official policy of the DSA since 2011 that they advocate for LGBTQIA+ liberation, full legal protection against discrimination, and that any single-payer medical system should include access to gender transition. They even updated their statement in 2017 to acknowledge that the far right, and Donald Trump specifically, is attacking LGBTQIA+ people. The DSA has been a strong advocate for all LGBTQIA+ rights, including trans rights, and a strong ally, unlike Ron, who hasn't even paid his dues in like 6 months. And he never comes to meetings.
They're great people, and I have the utmost respect for them. Step 4 of getting people to care is getting them together. There's another thing that I'd like to address, the root of the thing. The thing that the people proposing these actions are saying, the reason that they're going out of their way to do these horrible things, is because they believe that trans people are different enough from ordinary people to be a threat to them. This is a lie. It needs to be said specifically and deliberately and purposefully that this is a lie. Not just the idea that trans people, or gay people, or people of color, or even autistic people like me are dangerous in some capacity, but the idea that they are different at all. It goes without saying that none of these groups of people are any more or less dangerous than any other group of people, and any learned person knows that, but it's not just that. Trans people, and LGBT people, and people of color, and even autistic people like me are not different in any meaningful capacity. That's not to say that these people don't have differences. Different kinds of people can have different kinds of cultures, different kinds of goals, different kinds of experiences. But that can be true of any kind of people under any kind of circumstances. There are entire series of books written about how people of different genders, or how people with different siblings, or how people who were born in the same place, on the same tract of land, but in a different period of time, are different. But no rational person, no serious person would suggest that women, or middle children, or 13ers are so fundamentally different from other people as to be a radically different kind of human being requiring an entirely separate legal status. And part of that is because all of these books are pseudoscientific garbage. All of these books are pseudoscientific pop culture garbage. Ask me how I know. But most of it is that you know these people. You know they have different views, you know that sometimes they have different mindsets, but you know that they are still fundamentally people. And that is true for any kind of people. You know this. I know this. Anyone you would go out and talk to knows this, and anyone who claims that they don't is lying to you. And so I will say it again. The very idea that trans people are even different in any meaningful capacity is a lie. The way that we stop this, the way that these things have been stopped historically, when they have been stopped, is to reveal those lies, and to reveal what the people telling those lies intend to do.
Hey there, kiddos. Snuggles here again. Ron's busy at the moment being interrogated about un-American activities by, I think it's either the CIA or some secret branch of the GOP that thinks they're the CIA. So I'm going to be doing the outro for you today. Don't worry about Ron. There's nothing they can do to him that he hasn't been dealing with since the 3rd grade. Most of the links are still in the description, but Ron got banned from Twitter for threatening to throw his friend into traffic, so no more Twitter. That's probably better for Ron and humanity in the long run. Ron still has a Curious Cat, but no one uses that anymore. He's still got a Coffee, Ko-Fi, whatever the fuck. Now I know what you're thinking. Snuggles, you cotton-stuffed fucking bastard. Have you seen how few videos are being uploaded on this channel? Why should I financially support that? You know what? That's fair. And you know, Ron's been busy with other obligations like family, activism, work. Yeah. So Ron got a regular job here in town as the guy who gets kicked in the face by horses in movies. Seriously. And he gets paid in bags full of raw peanuts. So you know what? We don't really need the money as badly as before, but, you know, just keep that in mind. We can pretty well just be sustained off sweet, sweet, delicious peanuts. So instead of giving money to us, maybe consider giving the money to like GLAAD or the Trans Defense Fund is a good one. Links to those in the description. Also, I don't know if Ron has mentioned it a couple of times, maybe not, but you should see if you can participate in the National Day of Action to End Violence and Genocide on Trans People. It's probably a good fucking idea. Now, the link down there for GLAAD also has a list of resources for trans people, so if you know anyone in need of those, shoot that their way. By the way, special thanks to the people who looked over this script, including Skylar Zabo. Go check our channel out. I got the link in the description below. I was talking to Ron before he was grabbed by a bunch of huge dudes and dragged into a black van with tinted windows. But he said his next video is going to be something about conservatives aren't an ethnicity. They can't actually be genocided. Something about preemptively replying to some conservative bullshit I couldn't tell you. I don't know about you, but that sounds boring as hell, so I think I'm going to skip it. So maybe you should too. But all that to say, until we talk again, go out and do something important and take care of yourselves.
The DSA has been a strong advocate for all LGBTQIA+ rights, including trans rights, and a strong ally, unlike Ron, who hasn't even paid his dues in like 6 months. And he never comes to meetings. And you know what else? I'm gonna say it. He smells bad. He smells like stale beer and burned porno magazines. I don't like him. No one in the DSA likes him. His friends don't like him. His family doesn't like him. And I don't know why we haven't thrown him out. In fact, I'm gonna bring that up at the next meeting.